In the kingdom of Abanji, the sun rose with the pride of gold, spilling its light across roofs thatched with palm and courtyards dusted with red earth. The people of Abanji lived by stories, their history carved into drums and whispered through firelight. But among all the tales told beneath the moon, none was as revered as that of King Ease's crown. Forged, they said, by the hands of the first ancestors, the crown was not just gold and jewel, but a vessel of destiny. It gleamed like captured sunlight, and its glow was believed to bless the land with rain, fertility, and peace. When King Ease wore it during festivals, the drums beat differently, faster, stronger, as if even the ancestors danced again in joy. The king himself was a man carved by pride. He ruled with a voice that echoed through courtyards and a gaze that could silence even the boldest chiefs. His strength was his crown, and without it he was just another man. He guarded it fiercely, keeping it on an altar made of black stone within the royal hut. The rule was clear as the midday sun: no one but the king could touch it. To defy that law was to invite death, for the crown was said to carry the spirit of Abanji itself. Among those who lived and served in the palace was a young woman named Adana. She was a servant girl, her hands always busy, fetching water, sweeping floors, carrying calabashes of wine to the elders. She moved quietly, but her eyes were alive, filled with a curiosity that never slept. She had the kind of spirit that looked at the world not with fear, but with wonder. Her mother used to tell her before she died, "The wind may bow before kings, but even the wind carries whispers the king cannot hear." Adana remembered those words often, especially when she passed the royal hut and saw a sliver of gold glinting from within. Something about that crown called to her. It wasn't greed, she didn't crave its wealth or its power. It was something deeper, stranger, as if the metal itself hummed a song only she could hear. At night, when others slept, she would sit by her mat and imagine its weight upon her head, not in arrogance but in some wordless recognition, as though it belonged to her story too, though she could not say why. The villagers often spoke of destiny like it was a road made only for kings, but Adana believed destiny found its own paths. She watched the king parade through the marketplace, the golden crown gleaming under the sun, and she would feel her chest tighten. The people bowed low, their foreheads kissing the dust, and Adana would bow too, but her eyes would rise. She would study the way the crown shimmered, how its jewels caught the light, and a strange heat would pulse in her palms. One day, while cleaning near the royal hut, she found herself alone. The air was still, heavy with the scent of palm oil and old incense. The door to the king's sacred chamber stood slightly ajar. It was rare. Usually guards stood at both sides, but at that moment none were there. Adana's heart began to beat faster, thudding like a talking drum inside her chest. She knew she shouldn't look. Even gazing at the sacred object too long was said to invite bad luck. But curiosity, that wild spirit living inside her, whispered louder than fear. She stepped closer. The golden crown rested on its stone pedestal, bathing the dark room in soft light. It was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Each curve, each gem seemed alive. Her breath trembled as she reached the doorway. A strange breeze brushed against her cheek, cold and warm at once. The candles flickered, though no one had entered. Her fingers twitched. Adana took one step forward. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the clay floor. The crown's glow seemed to pulse, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard a whisper, soft, rhythmic, like someone calling her name through a dream. Adana? The sound melted into the air. She froze, every part of her trembling. Then she took another step. The world outside the hut continued as normal, children laughing, drums echoing faintly in the distance. But inside, time held its breath. Adana stopped just an arm's length from the crown. She could see her reflection in it, her tired eyes, the smudge of ash on her cheek, the flicker of awe and fear. She wanted to touch it, not to claim it but to understand it. Something deep inside her whispered that this gold carried a memory older than kings. But before she could lift her hand, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "What are you doing here?" She spun around, heart hammering, to see one of the king's guards at the doorway. His eyes widened in horror as he took in the scene. The open chamber, the servant girl standing before the crown. For a moment, neither moved. Then, in one violent motion, he seized her arm and dragged her backward, shouting for others. The spell broke. The candles snuffed out. The whispering stopped. By the time the king arrived, his face stormed with fury, and the court gathered in alarm. The sacred law had been broken. The punishment, everyone knew, was death. Yet as Adana was forced to her knees, her eyes lifted once more to the altar. The crown had not dimmed, it still glowed faintly as if amused. And in that instant something inside her shifted. She felt no shame, no regret, only a strange calm. For though the people saw a servant girl who had defied a king, the ancestors, watching through the crown's glimmer, saw something far greater. And the wind outside the palace began to stir, as if waiting for the story to begin. Sleep in Abanji was never silent. The night carried its own orchestra, the croak of frogs near the river, the rhythm of drums fading from distant fires, the lull of wind through palm leaves. But for Adana, there was always something else, a soft humming, golden and alive, that drifted through her dreams. Each time she closed her eyes, she found herself standing before the royal crown. It floated in the dark, glowing like a sun swallowed by night. And from within that glow came a whisper, tender, calling her name again and again. Adana. Adana. She would wake with her heart racing, sweat clinging to her skin despite the cool air. Every time she tried to shake it off, the whisper returned the next night, louder, closer, warmer. Sometimes she saw her own reflection in the gold, not as a servant girl, but as something else. A woman cloaked in light, standing tall, her eyes fierce like fire. It made no sense, yet it filled her chest with something she couldn't name, not pride, not fear, but a strange knowing, as if the crown itself was waiting for her. In the mornings she would sit by the river with her grandmother, Mama Odo, who was old enough to have seen 3 kings wear that crown. Her back was bent, but her eyes still held the sharpness of a woman who had survived palace walls and secrets. She would grind herbs while Adana fetched water, and when she noticed her granddaughter lost in thought, she would speak without looking up. "You're dreaming again, aren't you, child?" Adana froze. "How did you?" Mama Odo chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that came from knowing too much. When a girl wakes before dawn with stars still in her eyes, it means her mind has been walking places her feet cannot go. "Tell me, was it the crown again?" Adana hesitated, then nodded. "It called my name." The old woman's hands stilled. The grinding stopped. "That is not a call you should answer." "But it doesn't feel wrong," Adana said quickly. "It feels like it knows me. Like I've seen it before even though I haven't." Mama Odo's voice turned low. "That crown knows everyone who has ever lived under this sky, but it belongs to no one except the chosen. Your heart is young, Adana. The ancestors test the curious with dreams, but not all dreams are gifts. Some are warnings." Adana looked away, her fingers trailing through the water. "Then why does it keep coming? Why does it say my name?" "Because power listens when it is seen," her grandmother whispered. "And power is a dangerous listener." But Adana could not let it go. The pull grew stronger with every night. When she carried water past the palace, she could almost feel the crown behind the walls, humming faintly, like a drumbeat buried in her ribs. Sometimes, her chores would slow without her meaning to, her gaze drawn toward the king's hut, her hands trembling. Other servants noticed. "You look lost again, Adana," one teased. "Thinking of the crown?" She forced a laugh. Only a fool would think of such things. But when the others turned away, her smile faded. She wasn't a fool, yet she couldn't explain what lived inside her. The dream had changed her. She began to feel things before they happened. The rain arriving before thunder spoke, a visitor appearing before footsteps echoed. The villagers whispered that she was touched by the spirits. One night, as lightning painted the horizon, Adana's dream came again. But this time the crown didn't float before her. It lay broken on the ground and blood ran between its cracks. She reached out to touch it, but the moment her fingers brushed the gold, she saw visions. The king shouting, a crowd weeping, the ancestors' faces burning like stars. Then the crown reformed itself, shining brighter than before, and when she looked into it, she saw her own reflection wearing it. Her eyes glowed with the same light that lived within the gold. She woke screaming. Her grandmother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her trembling body. "Child, what did you see?" Adana gasped for breath. "It broke, and then it came to me." "Grandmother, it came to me." Mama Odo's face went pale. She whispered a prayer under her breath, drawing a circle of chalk on the floor. "Listen to me, Adana," she said, her voice shaking. "Long before King Ease, before Abanji was even called by that name, there was another queen. Her name was Ifyananya. She was chosen not by blood but by the crown itself. It rolled to her feet when kings fell, and she wore it until the day she vanished into light. Some say the crown remembers her and seeks the one who carries her spirit." Adana's heart pounded. "And you think?" "I think nothing." Mama Odo snapped. "Do not play with such thoughts. The king would kill you for less. And even if it is true, the path of destiny is never gentle. If the crown calls you, it may not be for glory. It may be for sacrifice." The words settled over Adana like a shadow. But even as fear coiled in her stomach, another feeling took root, a fierce certainty that she could not explain. That dream was no accident. It was a summons. In the days that followed, she worked quietly, but her eyes carried a hidden fire. When she sang while sweeping, her voice felt older, heavier, as though it carried echoes from another life. The guards mocked her for humming palace hymns, yet even they paused to listen without understanding why. At night, the dreams returned, softer now, the crown glowing like a guardian instead of a warning. The whispers grew clearer, "When the earth trembles, follow the gold." Adana didn't know what it meant, but she felt the truth of it deep in her bones. Whatever destiny the crown carried, it had already chosen her. And as the moon hung full above Abanji, her grandmother watched her from the shadows, praying to the ancestors, not to bless the girl but to protect her. For Mama Odo had seen this path before, and she knew one thing with certainty. When the crown dreams of someone, the world itself begins to change. The morning sun rose over Abanji like molten fire, drenching the kingdom in gold. It was the day of the festival of kingship, the most sacred day of the year, when the crown of the ancestors was brought out from its shrine and displayed before the people. Every drumbeat that echoed through the valley spoke of reverence and power. Every household burned incense to honor the spirits who had chosen their rulers. It was said that even the wind paused to bow when the crown was lifted beneath the open sky. Adana awoke before dawn, her stomach twisting with both awe and unease. Servants scurried around her quarters, wrapping themselves in bright wrappers, carrying trays of fruits, meats, and palm wine. The palace courtyards shimmered with banners of red and gold. Drummers practiced near the gates, their hands pounding in rhythms that seemed to shake the ground. From every corner of the kingdom, people had come. Traders, farmers, hunters, children on their father's shoulders, all waiting to see the crown of King Ease glint in the light of day. For Adana the day felt heavy with destiny. The whispers that had filled her dreams in the past weeks had not faded. They lingered beneath her heartbeat, gentle but constant. Follow the gold. The words seemed to hum beneath her skin as she tied her headscarf and carried her serving tray toward the main courtyard. The royal grounds had never looked so alive. Flowers adorned the pillars, and a great platform had been built for the king and his council. The golden crown rested atop a black velvet cloth, guarded by priests in white robes who carried staffs carved with ancestral markings. Its glow caught every eye, its power hushed every voice. Adana took her place among the serving girls, standing silently behind the rows of nobles. Her task was simple: pour wine, refill plates, move unseen. But her eyes disobeyed her duty. They kept drifting toward the crown. The sunlight caressed it, each gem winking like a tiny sun. It was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Her breath caught in her throat. King Ease appeared on the platform, draped in leopard skins, his chest glittering with ornaments. He raised his hand and the drums ceased. "On this day," he proclaimed, "we honor the bond between kings and the spirits. The crown you see before you carries the voices of those who came before me, and through it, the ancestors bless Abanji with life." The crowd bowed, murmuring prayers. Adana lowered her head, but her gaze slid up once more, her heart thudding. She could feel it again, that invisible pull. The crown seemed almost alive, its light pulsing softly, calling her name without sound. The high priest approached the platform to lift the crown and present it to the people. His hands trembled slightly, whether from reverence or fear no one could tell. As he raised it high above his head, a strong gust of wind swept through the courtyard. The drums rattled. The banners tore slightly. The priest staggered. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the crown slipped from his grasp. Time slowed. The golden circle spun through the air, tumbling end over end, heading straight for the marble steps. A cry escaped from someone, a single, collective breath of horror. Without thinking, Adana dropped her tray and leapt forward. Her hand shot out, and caught it. The instant her fingers brushed the gold, everything went silent. The drums stopped. The wind died. Even the birds on the palace roof froze. A faint golden shimmer spread from her palms, as if the crown itself recognized her touch. She stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The metal felt warm, alive, like it was breathing with her. Then a voice shouted, "She touched it." Another cried, "Sacrilege! The servant has defiled the crown." Adana flinched as the roar of the crowd returned, louder than before. The nobles rose in outrage. The guards surged forward. The priest fell to his knees, clutching his staff. "Abomination!" he cried. "The wrath of the ancestors will fall upon us." Adana's hands shook. She wanted to speak, to explain that it had been instinct, that she only wanted to protect it from shattering, but the words caught in her throat. The crown slipped from her trembling fingers and landed softly on the velvet cloth beside the priest. The king rose slowly, his eyes dark with fury. "Bring her," he said. 2 guards seized her by the arms. The tray she dropped clattered across the stones, spilling wine that gleamed like blood. The crowd fell silent again, the air thick with fear. Adana struggled to breathe. "I didn't mean." "Silence," the king thundered. "No one touches what belongs to the spirits. You have cursed this day, and you will be cleansed with the whip." The word struck harder than any lash. Whispers spread through the audience: pity, fear, disbelief. Some said the girl was possessed. Others swore they saw the crown glow when she caught it. But no one dared speak for her. As the guards dragged her toward the post in the center of the square, Adana's eyes lifted once more to the platform. The crown sat perfectly still, yet in that brief moment, when no one was looking, she could have sworn it shimmered faintly again, pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't know if it was mercy or madness, but as the sun glared down and the drums began to beat again, Adana smiled faintly through her tears. Because she understood, deep within, that what had happened was not an accident. The crown had fallen, yes, but it had fallen to her. The drums that once sang of celebration now thundered with dread. Their rhythm was slow, deliberate, cruel, the heartbeat of punishment. The festival banners that fluttered only moments ago hung limp in the still air as the crowd gathered in horrified silence. Adana was dragged through the dust, her wrists bound, her head bowed. The whispers of the people chased her like shadows. Why did she touch it? She has doomed us. The ancestors will strike. The guards shoved her forward until she stood before the whipping post, a tall wooden beam stained by the pain of many before her. The ropes that hung from it were stiff and frayed, as though they too remembered the cries of the condemned. The air smelled of incense and sweat, of fear and expectation. King Ease sat upon his carved stool on the high dais, his face carved into a mask of stone. His golden ornaments gleamed beneath the harsh light of the sun, but his eyes were cold, colder than the blade of a hunter's knife. Around him stood the council of elders, the nobles and the priests, men who ruled Abanji through fear of the unseen. "She touched the sacred crown," the high priest declared, his voice trembling with both anger and uncertainty. "No mortal hand may touch what is divine. The law demands cleansing. Let the whip purify her sin." A murmur rose from the people. Adana lifted her face, her dark eyes burning with a mix of terror and disbelief. "I meant no harm," she whispered hoarsely, though her words were swallowed by the crowd. "It was falling. I only wished to protect it." The king's hand cut through the air. "Enough. Begin." The guards forced her against the post. The ropes bit into her wrists. The sun glared above, pitiless and bright, turning the air thick and heavy. A man stepped forward, the appointed lash-bearer. His chest glistened with sweat, his eyes dead and dutiful. He held the whip like a serpent ready to strike. The first lash tore through the air. Crack. The sound echoed across the courtyard, sharp as thunder. Adana's body jerked, her teeth clenched, her cry escaping like a gasp of wind. Blood blossomed across her back, staining the pale cloth she wore. The second lash fell. Then the third. The rhythm of the whip became a drumbeat of pain. The crowd winced, some turning away, others whispering prayers beneath their breath. Her grandmother, somewhere in the crowd, clutched her wrapper and whispered to the ancestors, begging them to see the truth of the girl's heart. But above the agony something else began to move. A soft breeze stirred the edges of the courtyard. The torches flickered though no flame should have lived under the noon sun. The banners swayed as if stirred by invisible hands. Adana's breath came in ragged gasps, but she did not fall. With each lash the air grew heavier, charged, humming with an unseen power. The high priest, standing near the dais, frowned. He could feel it too. A presence. A pulse. The ancestors' energy moved through the wind like a whisper. When the sixth lash struck, a low hum filled the air, faint at first, then rising, trembling. The whip froze midair. The crowd stilled. On the platform the crown trembled. Its golden surface shimmered as if it had caught fire from within. The gems sparkled brighter, their colors deepening. For a heartbeat it pulsed, once, twice, like the rhythm of a living thing. The high priest turned, his mouth falling open. "My king," he murmured, "the crown?" King Ease rose to his feet, eyes narrowing. "What trick is this?" But no one answered. The humming grew louder, the air vibrating softly around Adana's trembling form. She sagged against the post, her face streaked with tears, her blood glistening under the sun. The wind caught her loose hair, swirling it around her like a dark halo. Then, without warning, the whip-bearer dropped his hand and stepped back. His eyes were wide, his arms shaking. I cannot," he whispered. "Something holds me." The king's voice thundered. "Finish it." The man tried, but when he lifted the whip, it slipped from his grasp as if yanked by invisible hands. The leather coil fell at Adana's feet. A gasp ran through the courtyard. The priest's voice quivered. "The ancestors are watching." Adana lifted her head slowly, her vision blurred from tears and pain. But as she gazed toward the platform, she saw the crown, glowing faintly, its light reflecting in her eyes. And though her lips could not form the words, her heart spoke them silently. "I see you." For a long moment, no one moved. The air trembled, carrying the faintest echo of a woman's voice, soft, melodic, and ancient. Some swore later that they heard a single note of song drift through the wind that day, like the beginning of a hymn long forgotten. The king, shaken but unwilling to show fear, turned away. "Untie her," he commanded coldly. "Let her live, but let her bear her shame." The guards hesitated before obeying. Adana's body slumped as they loosened the ropes. Blood streaked her back, but her eyes shone with something far greater than pain. As they carried her away, the crowd parted in silence. No one dared speak. No one dared move. But every soul that had witnessed it would remember, the servant who was whipped for touching the crown, and the crown that trembled when she bled. Days after the punishment, a thick unease settled over the palace like fog after a storm. The laughter of nobles grew quieter, and servants spoke only in whispers. The once glorious crown, which had shone like sunlight on water, now seemed to carry a dullness no polish could mend. When the king wore it, he staggered slightly under its weight. At first, he blamed age or exhaustion, but soon even his strongest guards noticed how his neck strained and his shoulders trembled beneath its touch. The court priest, wary of the omen, ordered the crown placed on the altar each night. Still, the whispers persisted, soft voices that came from nowhere and everywhere, echoing down the marble halls like the murmur of unseen ancestors. Some claimed they heard a woman's voice calling the king's name, others swore the sound was that of chains being dragged across the floor. Every time the king tried to sleep, he dreamt of a girl in tattered linen, her back bleeding but her eyes filled with light. When he awoke, the image would linger and sweat would soak his bed. The servants began to tell quiet stories of the whipping day. Some said they saw the wind swirl around Adana's body, shielding her from the last blow. Others whispered that when the priest's whip cracked, a faint golden glow danced across her skin. The king's advisors dismissed these as foolish peasant tales, yet even they avoided the courtyard where she had been punished. The ground there felt different now, too warm or too still, as if it remembered what had happened. In the great temple, the high priest fasted and offered sacrifices, desperate for a sign from the ancestors. One night, as he chanted before the sacred fire, the flames turned blue and hissed violently. He fell to his knees, trembling, and a deep voice filled the chamber, not heard by the ears but felt within the bones. "The crown knows her pain," it said. "You struck the chosen." When the priest opened his eyes, he found the offerings burnt to ash and the fire dead. His hands shook as he went to the king. "The gods are displeased," he warned. "The blessing has left your bloodline. Another bears the light now." The king's face darkened. "Another?" he spat. "Who?" The priest hesitated, afraid to speak her name, but the silence itself betrayed the truth. The king's rage burned hotter than the temple fires. "The servant girl?" he roared. "The one who touched what was mine?" That night, the palace guards were ordered to search every corner for Adana, but she was gone. Some said her grandmother had hidden her, others believed the wind itself carried her away. The king, sleepless and shaking, began to see her shadow in every reflection. The crown on his head grew heavier each hour, and when he tried to remove it, it would not budge. It clung to him like a curse, its once golden jewels now blackened as if scorched by divine fire. The palace grew colder, food spoiled overnight, and the royal drums refused to sound. Even the birds stopped nesting on the palace roofs. The whispers of the ancestors filled every corner, repeating one phrase again and again, "The crown knows her pain." The king locked himself in his chamber, haunted by guilt and fury. He swore he would find the girl and break the curse himself. But deep in the night, when thunder rolled across the hills and the crown burned against his skin, even he began to wonder if it was already too late, if the gods had turned their faces away forever, and the true heir to the crown was not a king at all. Adana lay beneath the shade of an ancient baobab tree, her back still marked with the scars of the whip. Each movement sent fire through her body, yet she refused to cry out. Her grandmother tended to her wounds with trembling hands, muttering prayers that smelled of herbs and old fear. But Adana's eyes, once dimmed by suffering, now carried something else, a quiet, unshakable light. She did not speak of vengeance or forgiveness. She only stared at the horizon as if she were waiting for something that had been promised long before she was born. At night her dreams returned, heavy with gold and song. She found herself standing in a vast hall filled with torches, and before her lay the crown, glowing as if it breathed. From the shadows, shapes emerged, tall and radiant, clothed in the dust of time. Their eyes held both sorrow and pride. "Child of the forgotten line," one voice whispered. "The blood that runs in kings runs in you. They hid you from the throne before your first breath could cry." Adana fell to her knees, trembling, her heart pounding like a drum. "Why show me this now?" she asked. "Because," said another voice, "your suffering has awakened what was buried. The crown remembers." When she awoke, her body was slick with sweat, but her spirit burned steady. She no longer felt shame for what had happened in the courtyard. The pain, the blood, the humiliation, they had become proof of her strength, marks of something divine testing its vessel. Her grandmother saw the change too. One morning she found Adana sitting upright, back straight despite the pain, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "You must stay hidden, my child," the old woman whispered fearfully. "They will come for you again." Adana turned her head slowly, her voice calm but heavy with new certainty. "Let them come. I will not bow." Word of her defiance spread through the village like a spark carried by wind. People who once pitied her began to visit quietly at night. Women who had been silenced, men who had been beaten for speaking the truth, servants who had seen cruelty and swallowed it. They came not just to see her but to listen. Though she said little, her silence spoke louder than words. There was something unyielding in the way she held herself, a dignity that made even the proudest warrior lower his eyes. The king's spies brought news of her gatherings. He ordered her captured again, calling her a blasphemer, a witch. But the guards he sent never returned. Some said their spears turned to dust when they approached her hut. Others claimed they heard the voices of the ancestors warning them to turn back. The people began to call her the woman who wouldn't bow. At night, when she closed her eyes, the ancestors returned, their voices weaving through the air like wind through reeds. "Your silence shakes the earth," they said. "Your pain has opened the path. The crown will find you again, and when it does, the world will remember what was stolen." Adana rose the next morning, wrapped in a simple white cloth, her scars still visible but no longer a sign of shame. They were symbols of transformation, each mark a piece of truth carved into her skin. She walked through the market without lowering her gaze. Where she passed, people stepped aside, not out of fear but reverence. She had no army, no title, no wealth. Yet her spirit carried the weight of something ancient and royal. She was no longer the servant who caught a falling crown. She was the heir the world had forgotten, and she would never bow again. Thunder cracked across the sky like the sound of judgment. The palace trembled beneath the storm's roar as rain lashed the stone walls. Inside the grand hall, King Is sat upon his throne, the golden crown resting before him on its carved altar of ivory and bone. The air was thick with incense and fear. The priests chanted prayers to calm the ancestors, but their voices faltered as the wind howled through the cracks, snuffing out torches one by one. Adana had been summoned that night, dragged by the guards she once defied. Her wrists were bound, but her face was calm, her steps steady. The king wanted her humiliated once more, to show the kingdom that no servant could challenge his rule. But as she entered the hall, the storm seemed to grow wilder, almost aware of her presence. The flames bent toward her, flickering like living things bowing in silent recognition. King Is's voice echoed, harsh and trembling beneath his anger. "You dare walk here again after the mercy I showed you? After the gods punished your insolence?" His words were loud, but his confidence was fading. Adana said nothing. Her eyes lifted to the golden crown, its surface dulled, its gems lifeless. She felt it again, that invisible pull, that whisper deep within her chest that said, "It belongs to you." Then it happened. A sudden gust of wind burst through the hall, shattering the windows. The altar shook. Before anyone could move, the crown toppled from its sacred place and began to roll. Slowly at first, then faster, spinning across the marble floor as if guided by unseen hands. The chant stopped. The guards stepped back. Even the thunder seemed to hush. The golden circle rolled through the crowd, past nobles, past priests, past trembling servants, until it came to rest at the feet of Adana. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break hearts. Water dripped from the ceiling, mixing with the echo of thunder far away. Every eye in the room turned to her. Her bare feet stood inches from the crown. It glowed faintly, casting soft gold light on her scarred legs and the blood that had once stained the courtyard where she was whipped. The king rose, his face pale beneath the dim torchlight. "Pick it up," he hissed at the guards, but they did not move. Their hands trembled, eyes fixed on the scene before them. The high priest fell to his knees, his voice breaking into a whisper that slithered through the hall like smoke. "The ancestors have chosen." Ease took a step forward, his rage shaking the air. "Blasphemy. It is trickery." But even as he shouted, the crown trembled on the floor and began to hum, a low, resonant sound that filled every corner of the room. The golden light spread, touching Adana's feet, climbing her body until her scars shimmered like inscriptions carved by divine hands. Adana closed her eyes. She didn't move to touch it, but the crown rose on its own, lifted by the invisible breath of the ancestors. The torches flared, the storm outside roared in approval, and the spirits of old kings seemed to fill the room with unseen power. King Ease fell back against his throne, unable to breathe. His voice came out as a whimper. "Who are you?" Adana opened her eyes, their reflection catching the golden light. She did not speak, she didn't need to. The wind itself answered for her, carrying her name through the hall like a song returning home. That night, every witness knew the truth that no punishment could silence. The crown had remembered its rightful heir. The hall trembled with a sound that did not belong to mortals. The crown's golden light still shimmered around Adana, bathing her in a glow that made even the most hardened warriors falter. Yet King Ease's pride burned hotter than fear. His veins pulsed with rage, his vision blurred by the realization that something greater than him had dared to choose a servant girl over a king. His voice, once heavy with royal command, now cracked like an old drum as he roared, "Seize her! Cut her down before the curse spreads." The guards hesitated. Their eyes darted between Adana, standing tall, untouched by fear, and the trembling crown now floating above her head. None dared move. The high priest, kneeling on the ground, whispered prayers that turned to whimpers. "Your Majesty, the ancestors." "Silence!" Ease shouted, his voice shaking. "There are no ancestors here. Only lies." But before his words could fade, the ground groaned like a living thing. The marble beneath his feet cracked. From outside came a deafening crash, lightning striking the palace gates. The storm that had lingered like a warning now unleashed its wrath. Wind screamed through the hall, ripping tapestries from the walls, scattering offerings and torches. The flames danced wildly, turning blue for an instant, the color of the spirit realm. Still the king would not yield. "Guards," he bellowed again. "Obey your king." Two soldiers, trembling, stepped forward with their spears raised. But as they neared Adana, the air grew heavy, as if the ancestors themselves were watching. The torches flickered, their light bending toward her. The moment the guards reached for her arms, thunder exploded above them. The earth quaked so violently that both men fell to their knees, dropping their spears, their armor clattering against the floor. Then came the voice. It was not human, deep, layered, echoing from the walls, the sky, the soil beneath their feet. "The rightful one has been found." The hall went deathly silent. Every flame froze in place. Ease's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, staring at Adana, whose eyes reflected the storm like twin mirrors of fate. He turned toward the altar where his crown once sat, now resting in midair, still glowing faintly. "Stop!" he screamed, lunging for it. "It's mine." The moment his fingers touched the gold, a hiss filled the room, the sound of flesh meeting fire. The crown, once a symbol of his power, began to melt. The jewels liquefied into streams of molten gold that dripped down his hands, searing his skin. He screamed, but he could not let go. The crown clung to him as if the ancestors themselves had decided to mark his greed. Adana watched silently as he fell to his knees, the molten gold burning trails into his flesh. Shadows began to stir around his feet, dark shapes that rose from the cracks in the floor, whispering in a language older than kings. The priest fled. The nobles pressed against the walls, unable to breathe. The shadows coiled around the king, their whispers growing louder, harsher, until they became one dreadful chorus. "You silenced the chosen. You stole the birthright. The earth remembers." King Ease's eyes rolled back, his scream torn away by the wind. His crown crumbled into dust, scattering across the floor like fallen stars. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. What remained was only his empty throne and the scent of burnt gold lingering in the air. The storm outside began to calm. The ancestors' voices faded into a soft hum, carried by the wind. The people who had watched in fear now turned to Adana, the woman who once bore the whip's scars, now standing amidst the wreckage of a fallen king. Her silence spoke louder than any song. A queen had risen and justice had claimed its due. The dawn that followed King Isa's fall was unlike any the kingdom of Abanji had ever seen. The storm had passed, yet the air still shimmered with something sacred, a presence that clung to the stones and trees, whispering through every leaf and flame. The sky was painted in deep gold, and the scent of rain mixed with the smoke of burning incense. In the great courtyard where Adana had once been whipped and shamed, the people now gathered again, not to witness punishment but rebirth. The nobles stood uneasy in their jeweled robes, heads bowed, the fear of divine judgment still heavy in their hearts. The guards who had once dragged Adana through the dirt, now stood motionless, unsure whether to meet her eyes. Even the priest, once a trembling servant of the king, now moved with reverence, clutching the remnants of the sacred staff as he approached her. Adana stood in the center, her back straight, her body wrapped in a white cloth given to her by the women of the village. The morning light caught the faint scars across her shoulders, marks of cruelty that no longer carried pain but power. Her eyes, once downcast and humble, now glowed with quiet certainty. Around her feet, the dust began to stir, circling like the spirits themselves were dancing in greeting. The priest's voice rose above the murmurs. The throne has fallen. The crown has spoken. The ancestors have chosen. He lifted the golden ring, the same crown that had melted and reformed in the fire of justice. It gleamed once more, brighter than before, as though reborn along with the dawn. The crowd watched, silent, trembling, as the priest stepped forward and lowered the crown toward her head. For a heartbeat, the air stopped moving, the wind holding its breath. Then the golden circle touched her hair. The moment it did, a wave of light burst from the crown, rippling through the courtyard like sunlight spilling into shadow. The wind ceased. The torches that lined the palace walls flared high, their flames steady and strong. The earth that had cracked from the storm now healed itself, the lines sealing like healed wounds. Every whisper, every sob, every sound was swallowed by the stillness that followed, a stillness filled not with fear but awe. Adana opened her eyes. The scars on her back vanished, her skin smooth as new clay. The crown glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she spoke, her voice was no longer just her own. It carried the echo of many voices, layered and deep, like the sound of countless spirits speaking through one soul. I am not chosen by gold or throne, she said, her words filling the courtyard and beyond. I am chosen by truth, the truth that no bloodline, no name, and no power forged by man can chain destiny. What the ancestors will, no hand of pride can unmake. The people fell to their knees. Some wept openly. Others pressed their foreheads to the ground, not in fear but reverence. The nobles, once arrogant, now bowed so low that their crowns clattered against the stones. The women who had whispered her story among themselves began to hum softly, a song born from the memory of her pain and the miracle of her rise. The melody spread, weaving through the crowd, a harmony of faith and freedom. The priest lowered himself before her, tears streaking his aged face. Your Majesty, he whispered. Queen Adana of Abanji. The title rolled across the courtyard, repeated by 1,000 voices, growing louder until it became a chant that shook the heavens. Queen Adana. Queen Adana. She looked to the sky, where the last of the storm clouds dissolved into brilliant blue. The wind brushed against her cheek like a blessing. For a moment she saw them, the ancestors, shimmering figures of light watching from beyond the veil. They smiled proud and still. Adana raised her hand and the chanting quieted. Let this day be remembered, she said, her voice strong. Let every child born after us know that no whip, no king, no fear can silence the one whom destiny calls. We are all born beneath the same sky, all heirs of the same spirit. The drums began to beat, not for war but for renewal. The dancers moved, the crowd sang, and the palace that had once been built on oppression now echoed with the rhythm of liberation. And as Adana turned toward the throne, she did not climb it with pride. She placed her hand upon it gently as one might touch an old wound. This seat, she whispered, is not for ruling but for remembering. And with that, the kingdom of Abanji bowed, not before a servant nor a ruler, but before the spirit of destiny itself, reborn in the woman who had once been forbidden to touch the crown. Seasons passed, and the kingdom of Abanji began to breathe again. The air no longer carried the scent of fear but of harvests and song. The rivers that had raged during the storm ran clear once more, their waters glinting under the forgiving sun. Markets bustled with laughter, drums beat in celebration, and for the first time in years, children played freely near the palace gates without being driven away by guards. The shadow of King Ease's tyranny faded like a scar healed by time. Queen Adana ruled not with iron or fire, but with quiet strength. Her palace doors remained open to all, farmers, healers, hunters, and widows. She walked among her people barefoot, listening to their troubles, blessing their newborns and helping them plant their crops. Her words carried the wisdom of the ancestors, and when she spoke, it was said that even the wind paused to listen. No longer was the crown a tool of fear, it had become a promise of fairness. The golden ring still rested upon her head, but its glow was gentler now, a symbol not of command but of service. It was said that when she touched it, the earth itself hummed in approval. The priests built a new altar in the palace courtyard, not to worship the crown but to honor what it stood for, truth. The old ways of power and bloodline were broken. No longer did birth determine a soul's worth, only the purity of heart. In the fields beyond the palace, songs of Adana's rise became part of the people's daily rhythm. Women sang her story while pounding yam, men chanted her name while working the forges, and children reenacted the day the crown rolled at her feet. The tale spread beyond Abanji, carried by travelers across rivers and mountains, until distant lands spoke her name with reverence. The queen chosen by the crown, they called her. Every year, when the festival of kingship returned, the entire kingdom gathered beneath the sprawling baobab trees in the palace square. The same festival where Adana had once been condemned became a day of remembrance and renewal. On that day the crown was lifted high for all to see, not on a king's head but in the hands of the people. It was passed from elder to child, from warrior to weaver, a shared symbol of unity. The storytellers would begin their tale as drums rolled low and steady. There was once a girl who touched what was forbidden, not out of greed but of destiny. They whipped her for reaching toward light, but the light reached back. The crowd would grow silent as the griots painted the memory with their words. They spoke of how the earth shook, how the ancestors spoke, and how justice found its voice through the silence of one woman. By the end, when the storyteller said, "And the crown rolled to her feet," the crowd would cheer, some with tears, others with pride. Adana herself always watched from among them, never from the throne. She wore no jewels, no heavy robes, only a simple white cloth, the same as she had worn the day she was crowned. Her eyes would soften as she looked upon her people, her heart swelling not with pride but gratitude. For she knew her story was no longer her own. It had become theirs, a living lesson passed through generations. Under her rule, the kingdom flourished in ways it never had before. The fields yielded abundant harvests, trade routes opened peacefully, and the young were taught not the history of kings, but the truth of spirit. Those who once believed power belonged only to the noble now understood that greatness could rise from anywhere, from a hut as easily as from a palace. And so, the crown of Abanji changed meaning forever. No longer did it rest upon the head of whoever claimed it by blood. It sought the one whose heart beat in rhythm with justice. Some said it even shimmered faintly when an innocent hand came near, a whisper from the ancestors reminding all who saw it that destiny could not be chained. When Queen Adana grew old, her hair silvered like the morning mist, and her eyes remained as calm as the river that once bore her pain. Before she took her final breath, she called her people together beneath the same baobab tree and placed the crown upon the altar. "This," she said softly, "was never mine alone. It belongs to truth. Promise me, when you see it shine, remember that the ancestors do not choose by birth but by heart." She smiled, and in that moment, a soft wind swept through the courtyard. The torches flickered, and those closest swore they saw the crown shimmer, a pulse of gold that matched the rhythm of her last heartbeat. From that day forward, the crown of Abanji was never claimed by force again. It was said that when a ruler grew corrupt or cruel, the crown would grow heavy and slip from their head, rolling away until it found another worthy soul. And so, Adana's story lived on, not carved in stone but carried in song. Every whisper of wind that touched the kingdom seemed to echo her legacy. Power belongs not to those who guard it with fear, but to those chosen by truth.